There's a voice in your mind right now. You can hear it, can't you? It's commenting on these words, perhaps even questioning where this is going. But here's what nobody ever told you. That voice is not you. It never was you. It's the most successful impostor in human history, so convincing that it has made billions of people believe they are it. Think about this for a moment. If there's a voice speaking in your mind, who is listening? If there are thoughts arising, who is observing those thoughts? What you've believed to be you your entire life might just be a character, a psychological mask so sophisticated that we forgot we're wearing it. The devil, as the scriptures say, doesn't appear with horns and a pitchfork. He's subtle. He appears as your own inner voice, whispering that you're inadequate, that you need to worry about the future, that you should have done something different in the past. He disguises himself as your own thoughts and thus manages to possess your mind without you noticing. Close your eyes for just 5 seconds right now. Listen deeply. What remains when the mental chatter stops? That silence isn't empty, it's pregnant with presence. That's who you really are. But if you're hearing this now, something deeper than the mind has already begun to awaken, something more silent than thoughts, more real than any inner voice. That's the presence you truly are. And today, we're going to help it recognize the impostor and reclaim its throne. To understand who you really are, you first need to recognize who you are not. The ego, that psychological structure you've confused with your identity, is like a mental operating system designed for survival. It was born when you were a child, created by the need to navigate a world that seemed threatening and unpredictable. It learned to adapt, to please, to compete, to defend. And it was useful for a while. Freud told us that the ego is like a mask we wear to face the world. Jung went further and revealed that this mask can become our prison, creating a shadow we project onto everything around us. But it was Emmet who touched the heart of the matter when he said, "The ego is not something. It is simply the absence of God." Think of the ego as the shadow a tree casts on the ground. The shadow exists, you can see it, but it's not real in any substantial sense. It's merely the absence of light. Similarly, the ego is just the absence of the divine consciousness that you truly are. It seems real, solid, urgent, but it's merely an illusion created by the lack of perception of your true nature. The ego has a fascinating characteristic. It cannot exist in the present moment. It needs time to survive, feeding off memories of the past and projections of the future. That's why when you're truly present, totally absorbed in the now, the mental voice disappears. The ego simply has nothing to grab onto. Imagine that for decades, the manager of a company locked the real owner in the basement and took control. He makes all the decisions, gives all the orders, and all the employees believe he's the boss. But down there, in the silence of the basement, the real owner waits patiently. He knows that eventually the truth will be revealed. This imposter manager is the ego, and the true owner of your life's company is the consciousness you really are. The ego is basically that employee nobody hired, but who sat in the boss's chair and now gives orders to everyone. The audacity is almost admirable, if it weren't so destructive. The ego is a master in the art of infiltration. It doesn't announce its arrival with fanfare. Instead, it blends so perfectly with your thoughts and emotions that you don't even notice when it has taken control. It's like a mental parasite that has learned to perfectly mimic the host's voice. Its preferred method is comparison. The ego can only exist in relation to something or someone else. It needs to be better than this person, smarter than that one, more successful than the other. Or, when that's not possible, it settles for feeling worse, more failed, more inadequate. The important thing is to maintain this constant dynamic of comparison, because that's how it creates the illusion of a separate identity. Judgment is its second favorite weapon. The ego is constantly evaluating, categorizing, labeling everything around it. This is good, that is bad. This person is trustworthy, that one is suspicious. This situation is desirable, that one should be avoided. Through this constant judgment, it creates the illusion that it's in control, that it understands the world and can predict the future. But its most powerful weapon is fear. The ego feeds on fear, like a vampire feeds on blood. Fear of the future, fear of others' judgment, fear of not being enough, fear of death, fear of life. The more fear you feel, the more real the ego seems. Because deep down, the ego is just crystallized fear, existential terror, transformed into a false identity. Modern neuroscience shows us that we have ancient, primitive neural circuits designed to keep us alive in a dangerous world. These circuits operate automatically, without our conscious permission. The problem is that these survival mechanisms began to be confused with our true identity. It's as if the house's alarm system gained consciousness and started calling itself the homeowner. Remember Stranger Things? The Demogorgon lived in the Upside Down, a dark parallel dimension that mirrored the real world. The ego is your personal Demogorgon, living in the upside down of your consciousness, feeding on your fears and insecurities, always ready to burst into the real world when you let your guard down. The most obvious characteristic of the ego is this incessant voice in your head. It never stops, literally never. Even now, as you hear these words, it's there, commenting, analyzing, agreeing, disagreeing, planning what you'll do after this ends. It's like having an obsessed narrator who insists on commenting on every moment of your life. And it's never satisfied, never. When you achieve something you wanted, it immediately finds something else to desire. When you solve a problem, it invents two new ones. When you're at peace, it finds something to worry about, because peace is the end of the ego, and it will do anything to avoid it. This voice has specialized in self-judgment. It's your fiercest critic, your cruelest adversary. It knows all your insecurities, all your weak points, and doesn't hesitate to use them against you. You're not good enough. You always fail. You'll never make it. People will discover you're a fraud. Day and night, this cruel litany echoes in your mind. But perhaps the most sinister characteristic of this voice is how it creates the illusion of control. It makes you believe that thinking obsessively about problems will solve them, that worrying about the future will somehow prepare you for it, that reliving past mistakes will teach you something new. It's like a hamster running on a wheel, creating lots of movement, but never getting anywhere. Here's the question that can change everything. If there's a voice speaking in your mind, who is listening to that voice? If there's an internal narrator, who is the audience? Pause for a moment. Literally pause and ask yourself this question. Who is hearing the thoughts? Who is aware that there's a mental voice speaking? The most revolutionary discovery a human being can make is realizing they are not the thinker of their thoughts, but the consciousness that observes the thoughts. You are not the actor on the stage of your mind. You are the silent audience watching the play. You are not the movie. You are the screen on which the movie is projected. This consciousness that you truly are has no age, no gender, no nationality, no personal history. It's the same in you, in me, in all people who have ever lived or will ever live. It's what Christian mystics call the Christ within, what Hindus call Atman, what Buddhists call Buddha nature. It's the divine presence that resides at the center of your being. Emmet Fox, That great Christian mystic of the 20th century, reminds us, "The Christ in you is the presence that observes, not the mind that speaks." This inner Christ is not an external historical figure, but the very divine consciousness that constitutes your true being. It's silent, serene, unchanging. It has no opinions about your life, doesn't judge your choices, doesn't worry about your future. It simply is. Think of the sun for a moment. It doesn't fight with the clouds that pass in front of it. It doesn't get irritated when they block its light. It simply shines, constant and imperturbable, beyond all the temporary formations that rise and disappear around it. Your true nature is like this sun. Thoughts, emotions, life circumstances are like the clouds, temporary and without real substance. The Christ doesn't arrive. He emerges like a sun that was always there behind the clouds of the mind, waiting for the moment when the sky clears to reveal what was never actually hidden. Silence is not the absence of sound. Silence is the presence of God. When you experience those rare moments of total mental quietude, when the inner voice finally stops, what you find is not emptiness, but fullness, not absence, but presence, not nothing, but everything. "Be still and know that I am God," says Psalm 46:10. This isn't just a poetic suggestion, it's a precise technical instruction. In the quietude of the mind, in the cessation of constant mental commentary, you discover your true identity. You discover that you are divine consciousness itself, temporarily playing at being human. Here's an inconvenient truth that few are willing to accept. The ego feeds on suffering. It needs drama, conflict, problems to maintain its apparent reality. A happy and peaceful ego is an ego on the verge of extinction, and it knows this instinctively. That's why it's constantly creating small crises, dramatizing minor situations, finding reasons to feel offended, misunderstood, neglected. Suffering becomes proof of its existence. "I suffer, therefore I am," could be the ego's motto. And not just any suffering, but it's special, unique suffering, more intense than anyone else's. The ego takes pride in its capacity to suffer, as if it were an achievement, a mark of depth and sensitivity. Jung warned us, what you resist persists. The ego has a perverse relationship with pain. It simultaneously wants to get rid of it and cling to it. It wants to escape suffering, but also wants to maintain the story it created around that suffering, because that story is a fundamental part of its false identity. It's important to distinguish between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in human experience. Bodies get sick, relationships end, people die, plans fail. This is the nature of existence in the world of form. But suffering is different. Suffering is what happens when the mind clings to the narrative about pain, when it transforms a temporary event into a permanent identity. Pain says, "This hurts." Suffering says, "This shouldn't be happening to me. Why does this always happen to me? This proves I'm unlucky, inadequate, destined for failure." Pain is a natural phenomenon that arises and passes. Suffering is the prison we build around pain with our stories and interpretations. Here's the metaphor that can free you. Imagine you've spent your whole life believing you were chained to a wall. You fought against these chains, lamented them, built your entire identity around the fact of being a prisoner. But one day, you actually examine these chains and discover something shocking. They're loose. They've always been loose. You could have freed yourself at any moment, but you were so convinced you were trapped that you never really tried to get up and walk. Recognizing the ego is the first step. Dismantling it requires consistent practice. It's not something that happens overnight, but with precise techniques and regular application, you can progressively withdraw power from the impostor and return authority to your true being. The first technique is observation without reaction. When the mental voice begins its automatic commentary, instead of identifying with it or fighting against it, simply observe. Be like a scientist studying an interesting phenomenon. How fascinating! There's the mind creating another anxiety story. Notice how it's trying to convince me that person doesn't like me. See how it's dramatizing this small problem. The second technique is conscious naming. Instead of thinking, "I'm nervous," think, "The ego is nervous." Instead of, "I feel inadequate," say, "The ego feels inadequate." This small change in language creates crucial psychological separation. You begin to disidentify from temporary emotional states and recognize them as phenomena arising in your consciousness, but which are not you. The third technique is returning to the body. The ego lives exclusively in the mind, in thoughts about past and future, but the body exists only in the present. When you feel you're being captured by the mental voice, bring your attention to physical sensations. Feel your feet on the ground. Notice your breathing. Observe the sensations in your hands. The body is an anchor that brings you back to the present moment, where the ego cannot survive. The fourth technique is declarations of true identity. Emmet taught us the power of scientific prayer, of conscious thought substitution. When the ego begins its negative narratives, consciously replace them with spiritual truths. I am pure consciousness. I am divine presence in expression. I am unconditional love. I am peace that surpasses all understanding. These aren't empty positive affirmations, but reminders of your true nature. The fifth technique is cultivating intentional silence. Set aside specific periods of the day to be in complete mental quietude. Start with 5 minutes and gradually increase. It's not complicated meditation. It's simply being present without feeding thoughts. When the mind begins its chatter, gently return to silence. Over time, you'll discover that this silence is your true nature, and thoughts are just temporary visitors. The ego doesn't need to be destroyed because it was never real to begin with. You don't fight a shadow, you simply turn on the light. When the light of divine consciousness shines, the ego's shadow naturally dissolves. As Emmet teaches us, you don't need to fight the darkness. Turn on the light. Your true identity is not the character you've been playing for years, with all its personal history, traumas, achievements, fears. That's just the mask, the role you assumed in this particular incarnation. Your true being is the inner Christ, the divine consciousness that chose to experience life through this specific human form. This inner Christ is not Christian, not Muslim, not Buddhist. It transcends all organized religions while being the essence of all of them. It's the living presence of God expressing itself through you, as you, but not limited by you. It's serene beyond all understanding, loving beyond all conditions, wise beyond all intellectual knowledge. When you recognize this truth, something fundamental changes in your life experience. External problems may remain the same, but your relationship with them is transformed. You no longer react from the ego's fear and defensiveness, but respond from the wisdom and compassion of your divine nature. The silence you've discovered is not a dead void, but a vibrant fullness. It's the very space of creation, the matrix from which all thoughts, all experiences, the entire universe emerges. You're not losing something when you disidentify from the ego. You're gaining access to the infinite source of all that is. This recognition brings with it a sacred responsibility. Once you know who you really are, you can no longer pretend to be small, limited, inadequate. You're called to live from this greatness, not as an inflated ego, but as divine humility.
Because when you recognize the Christ in yourself, you automatically recognize it in everyone else.
So here's the question that can change the rest of your life. If you're not the voice in your head, if you're not the mental narrator constantly commenting on your experience, if you're not the ego that worries and judges and compares, then who are you? You are the sacred silence that observes all noise. You are the imperturbable peace that witnesses all storms. You are the unconditional love that embraces all experiences without discrimination. You are the divine consciousness that chose to play at being human for a while. This is not a philosophy to be debated, but a truth to be lived. And living this truth requires daily practice, a sacred commitment to presence. Start small. Reserve 5 minutes every morning to be an intentional silence. Observe your thoughts without identifying with them. Practice compassion with yourself when the ego inevitably tries to reassume control. Cultivate moments of presence throughout the day. When you're washing dishes, be completely present in the action of washing dishes. When you're listening to someone, listen from silence, not from the mind that's already preparing a response. When facing a challenge, ask yourself, how would the Christ in me respond to this situation? Remember that awakening is not a single event, but a continuous process. There will be days when you feel completely connected to your true nature, and days when the ego seems to have completely reassumed control. Both are part of the journey. Be patient and gentle with yourself. In the end, you won't find truth in words, theories, or spiritual concepts. You'll find it in the space between words, in the silence between thoughts, in the presence that remains when all mental activity ceases, because that's where you really are. That's where you've always been. That's where you'll always be. Be still and know. The invitation is made. The door is open. The only one who can cross it is you. Not the ego that thinks it's you, but the true you that observes in sacred silence, patiently waiting to be recognized, honored, and lived fully. Welcome home. Welcome back to yourself.